Before she gave birth, her mother placed a basket by the
Going to
door.
labor. And my grandma put a basket in front of her bedroom and said,
If it was a girl, they would place the baby in the basket and abandon it immediately. It turned out that the baby was a boy. So the family celebrated, lit some firecrackers. Tragically, many babies were not so fortunate. In 1979, China's one-child policy came into effect. Obviously, this was an effort to reduce population growth. However, the policymakers failed to consider the consequences that would follow and irreversible societal damage. In fact, they probably still don't understand the issue. But if you've watched the channel for a while, you probably do understand the issue. You see, if a family could only have one child, they felt that they would be better off financially if that child happened to be a boy. So inevitably, this led to an imbalance in the male to female sex ratio, which is about 104 to 100 now. Now, on the surface, this may not seem that drastic. It's a difference of about 30 million people. But what many fail to consider is that this discrepancy is concentrated in those born after 1979. In other words, there's a greater discrepancy, it's more pronounced within those people of marrying age, those who want to start a family. Now, take this into consideration with what we already discussed when commenting on Gerber Johnson's video, The Death of Family.
The entire system is a Ponzi scheme. It depends on future contributions. And the human population has gone through a very fascinating evolution. There's more elderly and less teens. Can you see what this means? And all of this is a consequence of the death of family.
The amount of people starting families, even in the US, has already started decreasing. The age of people getting married has rapidly increased.
China's population is aging. Last year, roughly 18% of the population were younger than 14, and 13% were older than 65. Now, the United Nations are expecting a significant shift by the year 2050. By then, according to a new study, only 11% of the Chinese will be under 14, and seniors over 65 will make up a full third of the nation's population.
There's a multitude of reasons for this that were outlined in that video, but the point is that even in Western countries, populations are aging. In my video, I outlined what I believe to be the biggest threat to an aging population, and that's the failure of the Social Security system. And we saw the chaos that ensues when attempts are made to adjust the system, such as in France. The obvious route the United States will take when the chickens come home to roost is inflation, the invisible tax. But the can only be kicked down the road for so long. Now consider this problem on steroids, taking away a large percentage of women from the population. That's China. And here's the most interesting thing that policymakers will never understand, but you and I will. Not only does China have less women proportionally than they would have had without the consequences of this one-child policy, but in addition to that, the women that are of age to start families are even less likely to start one now. Policymakers will never comprehend why this happens, but I'll tell you. A funny thing seems to happen when the amount of men increases. Counterintuitive to what you might believe, despite the women now having more options to choose from, the rate of marriage and births actually drops further. Now, why is that? It's because they recognize their value. If a woman has tons of men throwing themselves at her, she's significantly less likely to settle down with one and start a family, versus a woman who rarely gets any attention from men. In fact, this was one of the primary factors why birth rates are declining in Western countries too. Women no longer need a man for financial support. They're more than capable of financially supporting themselves.
This is a quote from Friedrich Engels, who was a close associate of Karl Marx. The first condition for the liberation of the wife is to bring the whole female sex into public industry. And this in turn abolishes the monogamous family as the economic unit of society.
And so they have significantly less incentive to settle down and start a family than they used to. Now, that's just in Western countries. Now think of China, where the driving factor is compounded because of the surplus of men.
Play Cupid has been a constant challenge for matchmakers like Wang Luxi.
看这个女子不像是执政人，
你娃高子有没结？
1.7米，
买1.7米，这么高。
1.7米，这多高就多高嘛。
好哦，你娃给我设计姐姐看，这女1.7米的，我要设1.7米的为上的了。
他要求是他锅子是1.7米。
哦，人家要1.7米的为上的。
哦，我就不是。这个跟我娃俩同岁。
同岁。
Scarcity has lent families of eligible girls more bargaining power. Families of marriageable girls can afford to demand far more from potential suitors. They have to own at least a car and a house in the city before marriage is even on the table. Poor unmarried men are often seen as an embarrassment to family and community. Zuo, for example, had once dated a girl when he was a teenager.
要是家里不好，我不要他，人家就呼，人家家里不好，家里太穷，不敢带他回来。
As time passed, he lost all motivation to find a soulmate.
但是他们家就是没有人。
In China, now they have even less incentive to start a family, significantly less. The amount of men that will pour enormous resources into just one woman, all just to fail, is remarkable, but not unusual. It simply doesn't make sense for most women to settle down and start a family with the average man in China. Their incentives as a single woman are far greater. So not only is the population already aging, but now the issue is compounded.
Saying his country will establish a policy system to boost birth rates. I mean, there have been measures like tax deductions, longer maternity leave, enhanced medical insurance. All these things have put in place. They're not showing a real impact, are they?
Well, you can't just simply throw money at a problem and expect people to rush to the hospitals or have kids at home.
You actually can fix this problem by throwing money at it. The problem is, there's not enough money to throw at it. The current incentives for having children are not even close to what will be needed to tip the scale. The reality is that China's collapse will be accelerated due to the lack of understanding of human biology.
China's one-child policy that came into force in 1979 played a large part in bringing down the number of female offspring. For families who had to choose just the one, daughters were not an option, given the general preference for male offspring.
The book, The Future is Asian, makes a great case why China will surpass the United States, but anything could be rationalized. In order to do so, you need to turn a blind eye to contradicting evidence. The author isn't the only one guilty of this tunnel vision, though. All economists, government officials, financial analysts always ignore the most important fundamental factor: biology. You could all dress up in your suits and act formal and pretend that these things are too inappropriate and too immature to discuss. Meanwhile, all you go to the same websites at night before bed. How easily all of you experts seem to forget why we're here in the first fucking place. We're animals. Nothing.